I've got to ask you. You've been to Kansas before, haven't you?
I've been through Kansas. I've actually spent one night in Kansas too.
So as you were leaving Kansas, did you have the opportunity to turn to whoever you were with and say, "We're not in Kansas anymore"?
No, we loved it. We went to a place called Wilson, Kansas.
And Wilson, Kansas is, by coincidence, the name of one of the biggest country and western stars of the 1970s.
Oh, is that right?
If it's not, it should be. It
should be.
It certainly should be.
It is a great name.
Okay, so if you've spent all this time in Kansas, have you seen a real Twister in real life?
I saw Twister in Colorado.
Whoa!
Yeah. Very small in the distance, and it hadn't touched Earth yet, and I don't think it ever did.
So what you mean is it was a pointy cloud?
It was, but no, you could see the funnel, you could see it moving. It was quite eerie, and I was at a party. We were just watching it, and no one was concerned. It was raining just a little bit where we were, and I was told by some know-nothing that you can't have rain and a tornado at the same time in the same place. And I'm not going to talk about the veracity of Twisters yet, but the film. But I think you can have rain. I think we had, for my students, I brought in a meteorologist recently, and I asked that same question, and he said, no, you can have rain and a Twister at the same time. They can produce rain.
All you should have done was ask an English person. They would be able to tell you that, of course, wind and rain can exist at the same time, because that's what we see out the window for about 260 days of the year. So, yes.
Is this when the music comes in? Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Rosica.
My name is Andres Lorente, and on the Two Real Cinema Club, we love watching movies, and then we try to see some new ones and match them to an old film. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There might be a character in common or an animal in common. This time there's a storm maybe in common.
There's a weather phenomenon in common.
That's
yes.
Weather phenomenon.
The Two Weather Phenomenon Cinema Club. I've called on my notes here. I've called this podcast "A Mighty Wind," because we've watched. So this week we watched new wind-based sequel Twisters, and we are comparing it to a version, at least, of the film that Twisters keeps referring to.
Yeah,
The Wizard of Oz. Or is it? Did we watch The Wizard of Oz? What are we going to call it?
We watched. Well, I called the episode "Twisted Wizards" personally, but that's me. Because the wizard is twisted, isn't he? No, we do call it The Wizard of Oz. Yeah, I think that's correct. 1939 film and a 2024 film?
Yeah, 2024.
When was the
I've called it Dark Side of the Rainbow because I watched the Pink Floyd version this week.
Oh, you did?
Having never sat and watched that.
I started it, but I don't think I had timed it properly, so it didn't work too well. And I only did the first 30 minutes or so. But it was, it's fun. Did you watch it both ways? Did you watch it with the sound?
I just watched it with the Pink Floyd version.
Oh, my.
Just with there's just a little bit of Dorothy in the background.
Oh, I want to hear what you're...
We'll talk all about that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
I got stuff to say about that.
Tell me a little bit, though, about the original Twister, because I did not see that, and I think that was 2001-ish, 2004.
Yeah, so I have not seen the original Twister either, but I do remember for like a late 90s, early 2000s film, it has a cracking cast, isn't it? Isn't it? Is it Bill Paxton, Helen Hunt, and directed by Jan de Bont? And I think the main reason that film got off the ground at all, no pun intended, was because it was a showcase for this new breed of digital effects, which meant they could simulate wind.
Sure. And
I don't know whether the original is particularly fondly remembered. I think it's one of those films which is considered fine.
Yeah.
And I did read, I think Helen Hunt for a while has been trying to get a sequel off the ground. Oh man, I'm going to keep saying that, aren't I?
Oh, it's great. That's money in the bank. Use it while you got
it. So I think she envisioned it as a directorial project for her. That she, for a while, has been pitching to direct the sequel to Twister. But that hasn't really come together. So this time around, it's finally made it to the cinemas because of a pitch by Joseph Kosinski, who is too hot to touch following Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah.
So I think he pitched the idea. It was taken up, but he ended up just producing and not directing. So the new Twisters, the 2024 Twisters, has been directed by Lee Isaac Chung. Now, do you know him?
I know him from a totally different film, which was really good and very literate, and I was very surprised to see that he directed this, because Minari was his film a couple years ago, and it was so good and not full of special effects and not by paint by numbers writing either. It was really very original and very good. And I think it was very personal. I believe it was sort of based on his own life story. Did you know his work before?
A little, but I have not seen Minari. I did read that his pitch for directing Twister involved a scene where he had intercut a scene from Minari where two characters watch a Twister with scenes from the original Twister.
Oh.
And I think that was his pitch document to say, come and let me do this movie. I know him from something considerably less highbrow, which is The Mandalorian, the Disney Plus.
That's right.
TV series. So he directed an episode of season 3, which I think is the weakest so far season of The Mandalorian.
Okay.
I'm sure Minari is great. Season 3 of The Mandalorian really is not. So he's having an interesting career, going from something which is personal and authentic to something which is Disneyfied and kind of not so hot. Twisters has been written by Mark L. Smith. I don't know whether you're aware of his work. He is not in the Minari mold.
No.
So he wrote Vacancy and Vacancy 2, which are kind of motel horror movies.
Yeah.
He wrote the US remake of Martyrs. I've seen the original, but not the American remake, which is supposed to be very poor. He wrote Overlord. I think he's written a couple of George Clooney films, The Midnight Sky and The Boys in the Boat.
I have him down as having written The Revenant. Is that right?
Oh, yes. I think he did write The Revenant. You're right. I didn't put that in my list. I was being so scornful and rude and dismissive that I forgot to put down the good film on his CV. He did write The Revenant, although probably the best scene in The Revenant, though, would have been fairly easy to write on paper. Bear attacks Leo.
Yeah, but then doesn't he cut the bear open and gut it and then sleep inside it or something like that? That's good stuff. That had been on my mind for years, so I was finally glad to see that, but I didn't really like the film very much. But
I feel in my head I'm getting The Revenant mixed up with The Empire Strikes Back there, which also surely features the main character cutting open a large creature and sleeping inside it.
I better look at this. You're talking about the wrong film. No, I think it's right.
So, Twisters 2024, shall I tell you the story?
Yes, please do.
I guess you would call it. Is this a meteorological action film? What does this count under? It's almost by the end of the movie, it's kind of a disaster movie, but it takes a long time getting there. So I'm going to call it a meteorological action picture.
That's kind of you, very kind.
Kate, played by Daisy Edgar Jones, British actor. I think was she Irish? She's British.
I think British, yeah.
She plays Kate, a naive meteorology student who is conducting research with her equally young and enthusiastic buddies into using desiccants to quell whirlwinds. I'm pretty sure that's what their experiment is as they open the movie. But when the experiment goes wrong, most of her friends are killed, and she is devastated. Although, frankly, nobody watching the movie ought to be all that surprised that all those characters are killed in the beginning of the movie, because if you've gone in to see the film, you've noticed that none of those people are on the poster.
Yep.
So not a big surprise. So she matures, and then 5 years later, we catch up with her as she is working as a sober, sensible, besuited, office-based meteorologist until her old student buddy Yavi. And I'm going to take your advice on how to pronounce his name. Is it Javi? Yavi. Javi.
I forget what they called him in the film. Yeah, Javi, I think would be for Javier.
Right, okay, Javi. So I've already got it wrong.
But they may have called him.
Add that to the list of people I've offended.
Javi. Did they call him Javi? I don't remember. Yeah, maybe it was Javi.
It's Javi. It's okay. Javi. It's Javi. Played by Anthony Ramos. So Javi turns up asking Kate to help him to use a novel military sort of radar-style technology to study a spate of whirlwinds that's currently occurring in the Midwest. So she agrees to come for 1 week. But she doesn't reckon with the new generation of YouTube meteorology influencers. Is that a thing? Clearly it is. Who are also in town. They are chasing storms for clicks. Led by the photogenic and merch-selling Tyler Owens, played by Glenn Powell. So, can Kate tame Tyler and the storms? Or will she get blown away one way or another?
Ooh. Good. Or will
they should pay me to write these, shouldn't I? I shouldn't be doing these for free. You should pay me.
I'm surprised you didn't say, will she come to Earth or touch down? Or...
Oh, that's good. That's good.
But yours is better. Yeah.
Now, I think both of us have seen this film in a slightly unusual way this time round. So I went to see it at the Wandsworth Cineworld, just a few miles from where we live, where it's showing exclusively as 4DX presentation.
Oh my God.
So I've never seen 4DX before. Just from the name, it implies somehow, are you traveling through time or something like that? But no, there isn't any time travel. It's not even 3D. 4DX cinema is it's basically a seat that jiggles you about while you watch the film, and there are little nozzles which will gust air and maybe water over you as you watch the film. So it kind of turns the film into a kind of roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
And if ever there were a film made for 4DX, this is definitely it. And we got jiggled about an enormous amount. It was utterly ludicrous.
Wow.
The sheer amount of jiggling about in our seats. It felt like we were going to get thrown out of the seats at any moment.
Wow.
And for a film which is largely about driving around in trucks over bumpy terrain and wind, this is like the perfect viewing experience, I think. This is what 4DX was made for. It's all about bumps and wind. So from my point of view, 4DX were a success for this film. But I won't go on too long about it, and we'll probably talk about the qualities of the film rather than the seats that I was in. How did you get to see this film this week?
In a very uncomfortable seat in a nearly empty cinema that smells of sticky soda and popcorn. It's the regular experience. No wind. I wasn't misted by any. No one came around with a spray bottle to spray a little mist over me to get me into the feeling of it. No.
But the cinema did smell like a devastated corner of Oklahoma, though.
I will say, I did not pay money to see this film.
So how did you see this film?
I had recently made a blood donation, so I paid for this film with my blood. The promotion.
So they gave you a voucher to see the film in exchange for your blood.
They gave me like a link to Fandango, and I got one free ticket. So I had to pay for one ticket for my wife, who also saw it. But with my blood, I was feeling weak in the knees when I watched this film.
So the reason you got so short of breath during the climax wasn't because of the directing.
Yeah, so I had a very average experience otherwise. So I didn't have the extras. So that probably shapes and colors the way we both enjoyed the film. Be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I have tried to scratch out the colours that have been influenced by all that sheer throwing around, but I probably will come back to it. So we'll talk about maybe the opening image, which is the thing that I always like to whine on about when we start talking about these films. So the opening image of this film, it's an open field in the Midwest. There's some grass in the foreground, and the wind is shaking the grass, and we see Kate, the lead character, on her own taking photographs of a storm. And it's kind of and I'm guessing that opening image it's kind of telling you, well, this film is about wind in the natural environment, and it's kind of about a woman who's facing a big force largely on her own. I think that's the point they're trying to make with that opening image, isn't it?
Yeah, I think. She's home. We don't see her face in that opening image. I think she's walking away from us and into a storm. So it's spot on. It's a good opening image in the sense that it does give you a real metaphor for the whole film.
As far as themes for the film overall, I must say, we will talk a little bit more about what actually happens during the main meat of the film. But I came away trying to figure out, well, what is this film really, really about? And I think I got to the end and decided it's probably about, or trying to discussed the notion of processing trauma. I think that's what the film is about. We start out with this sort of conventionally structured first act. We get a whole bunch of happy-go-lucky students who are all smiling and having such a great time. It's obvious they're going to die in the next few minutes. They're shooting home video of each other. We see that Javi, he stays behind while the other students go ahead to drive right into the storm and release these big barrels of desiccants. And he ends up being the only one besides Kate who survives. And they have a big storm. Obviously, the one character from an ethnic minority dies first, and then all of the other characters die except Kate. And I think the rest of the film is sort of attempting to be about her processing her survivor guilt and the trauma of losing these people that she was close to and the circumstances in which it happened. I think that's what the film is trying to be about. Whether it succeeds in exploring that theme is another question.
Yeah, losing one group and then needing to form a new group or join a new group in order to process the trauma. Absolutely. And going from a group that had some non-white characters that died early and a geeky girl, right, to an all-white group, I think, isn't it?
Well, I guess the in Tyler's group, there is one character of color at least who drives the follow-up truck, I think.
Okay. Yes, that's right.
And the guy who operates the camera, I think he is a Latino man, isn't he? I think.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so there's a good mix there, but
they have tried to get a bit of a mix in.
It's uncanny though when there's an Indian gentleman on the first team, and they happen to mention that he's already been struck by lightning, so it's pretty easy to knock him off in the first 10 minutes of the film. But I just said, okay, that guy's dead within a few minutes. You're going to be dead as a character in this film, not the actor himself. But it was just, it made me feel like we haven't made that much progress, but such is life. But I love the fact that they talked about him getting struck by lightning already. Like, what's the likelihood of someone in a lifetime getting hit by lightning and being swallowed by a tornado? Obviously, if you're a storm chaser, your chances go way up, but I thought if you got struck by lightning, it was a good sign, and if you survived, there was surely nothing that was going to kill you other than old age.
It just means you've established yourself as a focus for meteorological adverse events, haven't you? We have this kind of fairly conventionally structured film. There is a first act that sees, it establishes who Kate is, and then it's at the 14-minute moment exactly that we kind of start this second act, I guess, that she's on the subway. She works for the New York National Weather Service. Javier turns up and he tries to persuade her to come and join him, and she refuses the call. It goes through all these standard beats. Then she sort of wakes up the following day and she sees a TV news report about more devastation from bad weather events. So she agrees that she will join him for 1 week.
Yeah.
Which gives the film a little bit of dramatic impetus insofar as all the events must happen within a week.
Ticking clock.
So we have a ticking clock. Mm-hmm. We have all these kind of standard sort of techniques and tropes.
And it's also
the story moving.
The storms are close to her family home too, so that raising the stakes. I mean, we're probably going to talk a lot about hero's journey in this film, but the stakes are up. The refusal of the call, and I'll talk about this later during a certain segment, I think. I don't chase anymore. That's what she says to Javi. I don't chase anymore. I mean, come on. Whew. That's a refusal of the call. So the ticking clock is there immediately. The stakes are up. It involves her family. The memory that she has in her dream is of her boyfriend. I guess his name is Jab. And she has a nightmare of him. He's in bed with her, and then she wakes up and realizes, oh, there's no boyfriend next to me. So, a lot of, oh God, we can't call them yet, can we? Let's not call them yet, but
they're going to be busy, though. They're going to be busy.
There are a lot of things that we've seen many, many times in film. So,
like the second act properly starts, I guess, when she goes to Oklahoma. She turns up. She's with Javier and his kind of team of semi-scientific, sort of semi-militaristic storm chasers in their uniform white vans. But then Tyler Owens turns up. This is Glenn Powell's character. I feel these days, whenever I see Glenn Powell, I'm immediately reminded of Mean Girls and that that gag about stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen. Because I feel like I need to approach someone at Universal and say, stop trying to make Glen Powell happen. It's just not going to happen. It's not. But here's Glen Powell. They're really trying hard again. He turns up. He's selling merch, and he's kind of brought a little cast of characters with him, including a British journalist called Ben. I love his character introduction. The first time we see him, he steps out of the passenger door of Tyler's truck, and he immediately steps into a puddle, and he looks like he's never seen a puddle before in his life. Mm-hmm. And I love the notion of an Englishman who's unfamiliar with puddles. But clearly there's one. There he is. And Ben, early on, he gets this line which got by far the biggest laugh in the screening that we were in. It was reasonably well populated, the screening that we went to. And when he's introduced as being from London, he specifies, well, from South London. Yeah. Well, from between Streatham Hill and what does he say? And West Norwood. That's it. He's between Streatham Hill and West Norwood, which is so badly not something that someone who lives in South London would ever say. We watched it in a cinema. I checked on Google Maps. We were 4 miles away from Streatham Hill.
Oh my!
And it's got a really big laugh that anybody would introduce themselves as being from a place between Streatham Hill and West Norwood. Basically, that's like 2 streets. Yeah. Why would you specify to some like an American that you've never met before which of the 2 streets that you happen to live on, just east of Streatham Hill? So big laugh where I saw it. I don't know whether that gag means anything to the rest of the world, though. Not here.
It felt like a pretty overdone. The clueless British journalist, the fish out of water, it felt pretty on the nose. So,
yes.
I was already choking with Ben by that point. So,
and so after these characters get introduced, we have there is a lot of dialogue in this film where people say moisture a lot. I have never heard the word moisture used so many times in a feature film script. Someone must say moisture at least 12 or 15 times in this film. They drive off, they chase the storm. Kate kind of completely bottles it because she has kind of flashbacks. Tyler storms off into the storm, lets off some fireworks and live streams the whole thing. Wow. And one of my favourite lines from this, wrote it down on my notebook from this sequence. Tyler turns to Ben, the English journalist, and he tells him, "Ben, you're not in London anymore." Yeah. This film is full of these Wizard of Oz references. Yeah.
And he's already said, "You're a long way from home, city girl," to Kate, I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Same line.
And then the Javi and his group have all named their radar probes after characters in the Wizard of Oz. And their trucks are all named after characters in the Wizard of Oz. I mean, it's all kind of very, very, I'm going to say on the nose again, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what it is.
So they chase one storm. Kate bottles it. We have a little bit of a sort of downtime, nighttime, and then we're back for day 2. Should we ring the spoiler bell, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. There's much to spoil here, so...
So imagine this bell is falling from a poorly maintained church tower in Oklahoma City. Here we do. Yeah, I can hear it hitting the
should reverberate, yeah.
So this is kind of like the beginning of what passes for subplot, I think, in this film. That on day 2, Javi and his crew are having breakfast with Riggs, who is a property developer, and the main kind of B plot of the film is that the property developer is moving in on people who've had their property destroyed by a twister and buying it at a cut rate because they're either underinsured or they're not insured or they're desperate and at their lowest ebb. Yeah. And this kind of becomes a theme that will eventually change Javi's mind, or it'll be the focus of a lot of the conflict within that group. They chase some more storms. Kate gets her instincts back. They find another twister. But then instead of tracking down the radar which has gone missing, they see that the twister is heading for a town, and they instead decide to go and give food relief and help clear up the mess at the town which is being destroyed. And I guess this kind of counts as the midpoint. So we have had, two big storms, and this is when we have our first kind of lull, and we start to see some of the ground level effects of this kind of devastation. If they give away food relief, which consists mainly of Doritos, as far as I can tell, definitely not product placement in this film. And then Tyler takes her to a rodeo where he tells Kate, "You don't face your fears, you ride them." Mm-hmm. I feel like there are a number of lines of dialogue in this film which were written mainly with the intention of being log lines on the poster, rather than genuine words that people would say to each other in an actual conversation. Surprise, surprise, there's another twister. There's more devastation. There is, interestingly, a cameo by the son of Bill Paxton, I think. I think it might be James Paxton, who is the rude guy in the motel.
Oh.
Who says, "I don't have to give you a bad review." There's him and a cynical woman who climb into a car as the twister arrives and then are immediately killed.
Yeah. Kind of a Ghostbusters moment there that just gets sucked up instantly.
They do, yes. They hide in a pool. There's devastation, and Riggs turns back up again, trying to buy some real estate. So we get Kate leaves everybody now. She's so upset by all the devastation that's happening that she drives to her mother's house for a good montage.
Yeah.
Kate looks around her mum's old barn, looks at her old science experiments, has to kind of explain to her mum why she hasn't spoken to her for months or years, and then turns up in the middle of the night. Tyler tracks her down, and immediately the mom is trying to get Kate kind of set up with Tyler. The very moment he walks through the door, she's, "Oh yeah, he looks good." Like a whole day passes. I think the film kind of implies that Tyler has maybe spent the night, but I don't really understand exactly what has happened there. But Tyler and Kate then kind of team up, and they decide that they're going to go out together, find a storm, try some desiccants. There's a whole kind of romantic subplot in this movie which doesn't really get going at all, I would say. Yeah. I've written here in my notes that the romance is entirely without chemistry. I read that apparently the two leads, they had a chemistry test over Zoom to check that they would be compatible on screen. And I can only assume that the chemistry test was a test about copper sulfate and the melting point of mercury or something like that, because there doesn't seem to be any romantic chemistry between the two of them at all. I'm guessing that's what they're kind of aiming for, but doesn't really come through. We're charging well past the midpoint now towards the kind of the final big sort of third act set piece. We have a sequence which is a little bit like an episode of the A-Team, where Tyler and his crew, they end up building rockets and buying more desiccant, and they rig a aluminium trolley to release desiccants and into the atmosphere. There's a really, really big storm. And a number of action set pieces before finally most of the cast are hiding in a movie theater that's playing Frankenstein, while Kate takes her truck alone off into the middle of the storm, releases her chemicals. Interestingly, she takes her hands off the steering wheel, and I think this is supposed to be her moment of letting go. Ooh. I think of like releasing the guilt that she feels of what happens to her crew before. The wall of the theater is ripped off right when they're watching Frankenstein, and right at the line "It's alive" is the moment when the wall kind of gets ripped off, which is the finest breaking of the fourth wall I've ever seen in a film, I think. But she manages to quell the storm. Everybody is rescued. It's all right. And then the film ends with a kind of meet cute at the airport. She is going back to New York after her promised 7 days. But she quotes back to Tyler, with whom she has so little chemistry, something that he says as his catchphrase on his YouTube channel. He says, "If you feel it, chase it." And she tells him, "Oh, if you feel it, chase it," which means that he runs back into the airport and picks up her bag. I think I can't quite remember what happens, but it doesn't seem very convincingly romantic. Did you come away with touchy-feely romantic feelings at the end of the movie?
No. I thought it was kind of appropriate, though. The film doesn't end on a kiss, which I was glad to see. Okay, but I think you're right. We never see them kiss. There's not a lot of real chemistry in the film. It's sort of setting up the idea that storm chasing and storms brought these two people together, and then when they solve the problem, it's going to, drive them apart again. But then her flight, she's going back to New York City. Her flight is canceled by an impending storm. So again, the storm has this effect on their relationship and gives them a chance they're walking out, but I don't know if they're going to go to a restaurant and just get to know each other once again, or develop some chemistry, but there's some future there is what we're assuming. So it wasn't like these other films we've seen this year that are so dependent on that final kiss or the unlikely pairing of some people to make the romantic interest line of the story come together. So I appreciated that, because I think they didn't deserve the kiss. They didn't really deserve the romance. So it's still a little bit up in the air. I love the image of the tornado becoming the film, because in that town, when the wall is broken there, it's actually the movie screen that disappears, and all of a sudden these people are sort of in a theater watching this tornado. I agree with you. It's one of the most clever scenes I've seen in a long time, because the tornado becomes the image that they would have been watching on screen. So it's it's pretty clever. But there's not a whole lot of other stuff that's particularly clever in this story. And I think I'm going to call it the B story, or actually I'll call it the B- story, because I think one of the best parts of this film is really just glossed over pretty quickly, and I don't think it's important to the writers or the director at all. It's that Javi's team is actually helping this real estate broker Riggs to buy up all these properties, and he's lowballing them. And as you mentioned, there are people who've lost property, they don't have insurance. And I think that's a great idea. I love this premise of capitalizing on others' personal financial tragedies. And this is, again, a fingerprint on the film, nothing more than that. But it's something that the writer Naomi Klein calls disaster capitalism. And I loved that idea, and I thought it was smart. It's in there, but it's I think some people would have missed that. It's so, I won't say it's subtle because that's inaccurate, but it's so cloudy that I think a lot of people would have missed that. But I loved that. Because otherwise, at times, this film feels like a massive advertisement for Anheuser-Busch, because there's Budweiser and Busch all over that. It also seems like an advertisement for the fossil fuel industry, because how many windmills do we see go down easily in these? These wind tower brands are very vulnerable. We could fix climate change with them, or more chemicals is they're shooting chemicals into the tornadoes in order to dry them out and prevent damage. Well, it'd be a lot easier just to stop using as much fossil fuel. So, I think the climate change angle is completely ignored. I don't think there's any mention.
It is, isn't it? Yes.
There's no mention of why these storms are happening or anything like that. So, and that would be too smart a film, I think, for what these guys are aiming to produce. So I won't fault them on that. It's not a terribly brave film. It's very conservative. It just follows the sort of hero's journey and all the plot points that we're expected to see. So it's not that interesting to me, but there are a couple of good moments in it. But I think they're so far and few between, or few and far between, that they don't really have the effect that I would like to see. Yeah, but there's also, you forecast this thing immediately. At least I did. I saw this miles away. I was already thinking, if you combine the two skill sets of the main characters, right? Kate has these desiccants. She wants to get them up in the sky. And this guy, Tyler, happens to, for some reason, send fireworks into twisters. So if they combine their two skill sets with a little bit of romantic chemistry, then you have the solution not only to the big problem with the tornadoes, but also to their chemistry and romance difficulties. So I saw that coming very early on. I think that's what was disappointing about the film, is that it was so formulaic. And I think the average theater goer now is very literate in hero's journey, maybe subconsciously without knowing it, but you know exactly what's going to happen in films, because no one has the guts to do something original. This is a recycled product from 28 years ago. This is the first Twister. And people just are not very brave. I think, the people who fund films want stuff that, has these pat lines, this dialogue that is just stolen or means nothing. This is a talky film at times, but there's really no interesting dialogue, I don't think. And people just aren't willing to take chances on interesting films. And this is one of those films where You could make, with this money, you could make 10 really interesting films that are a whole lot smarter and they're not so dependent on cliches than the one big one. So that's kind of my overall view of the film. I hate to be so negative. I mean, I didn't mind it. It was candy. It was easy to watch. I didn't really have there's nothing I really hated about the film, but there were a couple of clever things that I liked. There was the windmill thing that I didn't like. And then just a lot of it was just sort of like fat. I felt like it was a fat film.
It's very interesting the thing about climate change, because that seems like such an open goal that this film really should be about climate change.
Yeah.
And yet I get to the end and I've written my notes: politics of film : reactionary. I think actually it's a very kind of reactionary, conservative with the capital C film. There's this line I wrote down. Tyler says, "Kate's from New York. You can't trust anything she says." Yeah. It's this kind of distrust of big city people, isn't there? Her mum is she's happy to grumble about inflation, but not to have any kind of comment about climate change. I mean, there is, I think, a bit of an element of poverty tourism to this film. I think part of the gaze of the film is looking upon poor people who've had their homes smashed up.
Yeah.
And kind of Kate's journey very much seems to play with this notion of the city girl is someone who is less genuine than the country girl.
Yeah.
When she's city girl, she's kind of sort of bad, and she kind of lies and deceives people. And when she becomes country girl, she's kind of on back on the team again.
Yeah,
it's like she needs to remember who she was. You come from the country, don't listen to these New York elitist types.
Yeah,
it feels like a kind of a bit of a right-wing film to me, which is a shame, I think.
I would also add that B- story that I talked about with the real estate development. It's not really clear to me why there would be much money rebuilding something. I couldn't tell if you wanted to put new housing developments in these areas or what, but these are places that get hit by tornadoes all the time. It's not a place where you should really be investing. And honestly, people who live there probably know that they shouldn't be living there if they want to be completely safe. There are dangers to it. So it's kind of, I don't even know if that subplot really works, because I can't imagine anyone really wanting to invest a lot of money. You might be able to do something low budget, but you wouldn't be paying a lot of money for places that are going to get swooped up by the next tornado. Because according to this film, there are a lot of tornadoes. In 1 week, you can see 10 of them easily. And some of them are twin tornadoes, too. We saw a twin tornado at one point.
I mean, I don't really understand why Riggs needs to pay for a big load of sort of scientific equipment when all he needs really is a pair of binoculars, and you can spot where the twisters are.
Yeah, wait it out.
And he's going to head over there after the twister has left and offer people money for their property. He doesn't need a team of scientists to help him do that. So it doesn't really quite work. It's like you can sort of see the idea they were aiming for, but it needed to develop a little bit before it actually kind of made sense.
Yeah. Well, on one level, it's definitely a fantasy film, because I don't think there are, maybe I'm living under a rock somewhere, but I don't think there are that many YouTube teams, influencers who are going out chasing storms. I don't think there's this unified network of people who are going to compete with one another to get into these places of great danger in order to produce content. I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous. So it's definitely a fantasy film, and I think it sort of rides dangerously close to reality, and that's why, again, there's something disappointing about it in that way, because it's just not good truth. It's not even good fantasy, I don't think. So it's just riding this weird seam, I think.
Speaking of not good truth and not good fantasy, I wonder whether we should phone up big city law enforcement. Should we phone the Cliche Squad?
I thought you'd never ring them.
Cliche Squad.
So this film is kind of full of cliches, but I've just written a small number on my list here after a while. Early on, I noticed, and you've spent more time in New York than I have. Am I right? Does every corner of New York have a guy selling hot dogs? Because that scene where they're walking on the street in New York, it seems to me like there's an awful lot of people selling hot dogs on the corner there. That's how you tell people it's...
I think the gourmet industry... interests of the average New Yorker have changed somewhat. So there's a lot of very interesting food on the streets of New York. It's dated. That's a dated cliche. Absolutely, yeah. That's the problem.
I did notice when early on when Tyler appears, like a whole bunch of YouTube channel fans turn up, filled with adulation, and one of them is I think a Japanese tourist who jumps out of a car, like he's kind of making Japanese noises and wearing a pakamac with a big kind of camera, and it seems I can't believe this is kind of horrible Japanese tourist cliche. Which feels like it belongs in a Mr. Bean episode from 1985. That's coming up here now.
Yeah.
Oh dear. And then there seem to be lots of kind of down home, good old boy, Dukes of Hazzard, Oklahoma cliches, like the mom kind of drinking a beer, and it's like she's like someone who pays more attention to cows, and she wears a lot of plaid, and there's a lot of kind of hillbilly yee-hawing going on, which strikes me as just not quite authentic. I think I feel like those characters all come from central casting.
Definitely, yeah. So a certain level of poverty porn there, perhaps, yeah.
That's what I've got on my list after I slightly ran out of energy writing down all the cliches, because otherwise you end up annotating the whole film. Yeah, anything else leap out at you?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's cliche heavy. It's cliche dependent. I think that's one of the things that it's a problem with the film. The bumbling journalist. These journalists they're well trained. They go into war zones. They know what they're doing. So the fact that the British journalist is completely unprepared, and as you said, steps in the mud as if he's never seen it before, or vomits because the ride is very rough, or panics because there's no safety belt. I mean, that character is cliche all over. It was sad. I think for me, probably the biggest problem is hero's journey in general. I think has become a cliche, at least for me, someone who sees a lot of movies and thinks about them and writes them. The refusal of the call has become such a cliche now that it's just like you have to have refusing the call of duty in every one of the big films these days. So I think that's just it's just too played out by now. And I think I think audiences are either so trained at this point to see these things, or just so numbed by them that it doesn't maybe make a difference. But I think people are catching on to this for sure, and it just makes watching movies a bit more dull, I think. Here's one that's it's a film trick, but I think this film really overdoes it, and I'll talk about it in some detail. But lots of photos lying around to tell stories. There are way too many in this film. When they go to that barn, they're all the pictures of the gang when they were happy and young and alive. And now Kate's, lamenting because her friends are dead. And in this film, there are even more of them in the credits. It comes back again. Yes. So, and that's the problematic part for me, because they're kind of these little bits of exposition everywhere, either on newspaper clippings or on photos. And the very last bit sort of undoes the entire film, because this is a totally farcical story. I'd love to talk to some meteorologists and some scientists, but I don't think we're ever going to throw desiccants up the funnel of a tornado and avoid disaster. But at the ending, it's sort of this predictive exposition. It's building this future story where Tyler and Kate are working together, and everyone's just succeeding at changing the way that we approach tornadoes and storms. And it gives you magazine articles about all the great work they're doing. And it's just sort of this, like, I don't know if they're setting it up for a, dare I say, sequel? Twisters. So I think it's bad enough when it's just happens to be there on the table when you need all these photos to tell the story. But I think when you go to the end credits and you're still telling the story and setting up the sequel, that's just a step too far for me. So, and then I would say, ultimately, I think the whole hero's journey has sort of become a cliche at this point. Just these steps that you have to hit, these beats that you have to hit and write into your script in order to get it made. And I think, again, it's that conservative approach to filmmaking. People want stuff that just works, even if it's not interesting. It's something an audience can follow and it works. And I think the hero's journey has kind of become it's become a horse that we've beat too much, I suppose.
Yeah, that horse is tired and thin now.
Yeah, nearly dead.
Needs to be put out to pasture.
I'd like to euthanize it.
Where's my gun? Let's have a break.
Yeah.
I'm going to dry my shoes off after stepping in a puddle. And we will come back and talk about probably a rather better storm-based fantasy.
Yeah.
We will take a visit to the dark side of the rainbow.
James, are you familiar with the Pledge of Allegiance in the United States?
I feel like I've seen it in every movie about school children in the States. Yeah.
Oh, good. Because I had to say it a lot as a school child. I still hear it. I just don't do it anymore in school. Don't report me. It goes like this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. It starts out kind of innocently, but there's this weird profession of loyalty to a piece of colored fabric.
Yeah.
I've never understood that. But then the metaphor comes along. It says, and to the republic for which it stands. And then the pledge goes on to one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. But ever since I was a kid, I thought that which it stands was witches' stands. Like they have some sort of lectern from which they profess things. And I fell in love with the idea of witches' stands. So I did a quick search on the internets, and I checked in with my friends at the Friends of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It's a fundraising arm that actually works with the Friends of the Feline Facial Recognition and Retina Imaging Group, or as we know, FURRY. Also a sponsor of the Two Reel Cinema Club. And I learned that they have a joint fundraising venture. This is awesome. You're going to love this. And 3 new products for sale. So I'm going to talk about
fantastic.
this first one. Yeah. And then in subsequent weeks, we'll come back to them. One of which is, guess, witches' stands. So it's a lectern.
It's tripod. It's tripod for witches.
Oh, it's better. It's better. Listen to this. It's a lectern with a built-in state-of-the-dark arts microphone that filters out the shrill and off-putting sounds of a witch's voice. This miracle microphone, I think it's produced by the good people at Blue, the Yeti microphones, that we use here on the Two Reel Cinema Club. Another sponsor of the program.
Another sponsor of the Two Reel Cinema
This
Club.
dark arts microphone filters out the shrill of these sounds of witches' voices, and the miracle microphone is mounted upon a plus-size podium that conceals broomsticks, bicycles, scooters, or other communist forms of personal transportation. Witches' stands podiums are available in red oak, teak, ebony, mahogany, and, of course, American witch hazel. The American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU here, approves of this free speech-friendly furniture. The microphone is also sensitive enough to temper the pagan, Wiccan, and radical messages therein, making them more palatable to the layperson's ear. The teleprompter screens on witches' stands multitask to camouflage warts, unsightly nasal bone structure, and angular chin bones associated with witchdom and warlockdom. In short, witches' stands make free speech more equitable, accessible, and sonorous for its speakers. Look for witches' stands at your local furniture stores or dark arts gatherings and pagan festivals near you. It's the rostrum for those with too much rostrum. While some days are bygone, these deities are here to stay and here to say. Witches' stands, finally making it easier for witches to articulate and communicate the ideas for which they stand.
Now that is a massive untapped market. That's incredible, yes. Good, and we are back. Welcome back to the dark side of the podcast, the other side of the rainbow. We have watched a version of the film referenced so very many times in Twisters.
Yeah.
We've gone back and watched The Wizard of Oz from 1939. But at least I haven't just watched The Wizard of Oz. I've done the thing which all stoners since about, I think it was 1995, have done with Wizard of Oz, which is watched the film while listening to the Pink Floyd album, Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
So this is apparently, I did some research on this. Apparently this notion of playing the album while watching the movie was first discussed in an article in 1995.
Wow.
by Charles Savage, who is a kind of, I think he's like a defense journalist largely now. So it was early in his career. He was working on the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, and he had spotted on a Pink Floyd news group. Do you remember those news groups?
Yeah.
Man, the early days of the internet.
Yeah.
You'd spotted the suggestion on a Pink Floyd news group that you should watch the film The Wizard of Oz while listening to The Dark Side of the Moon. So that was the first time that it was published in the mainstream, and it's become a thing.
Yeah.
Which I've never done. Now, you were telling me that you had actually done that in a cinema or a movie club or something. You actually kind of sat down and watched it.
A big movie house with a great audio system and a big screen. So I think that's the only time I've done it. I did, for this podcast, I did the first side of, because albums used to have sides. So it's the first 5 or 6 tunes on Dark Side of the Moon. And it worked pretty well, but it wasn't the same effect. I mean, I remember being so impressed when I saw it in the big theater because it worked really well. And then you've got the audience reacting to it. So, people would giggle when when Dorothy comes home and it goes, home, home again. And then, yeah, all the stoners make the noise, yeah. So I had a great first experience and I tried to duplicate it and it didn't really work. But I'm glad you did it. So I definitely want to hear everything you have to say about the Dark Side of Oz or the Wizard Side of the Moon or whatever it's called. I don't know. Because you had a special experience. You're having the special experiences this week. You had the 4DX and then
yes.
Dark Side of the Rainbow and all that.
This has not been a normal week at the cinema for me.
Pretty banal for me, so maybe I should ruin this story by telling it really blandly.
The other thing I did this week was I read the book The Wizard of Oz as well.
Of course you did. Frank L. Baum.
Frank L. Baum, written in 1900. What I didn't realize that the book predates the film by 39 years.
Yeah. And there's a series, right? It's a series of stories or books.
It was a series. So
okay.
the book stood alone originally, but there was a Broadway musical based on it in 1902.
Oh.
The musical was, I think, fairly different to the book and the film.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like a musical comedy. The book is the book that we still read now. The musical largely concentrated on the characters of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, who became much bigger, more popular characters as a result of the musical. Mm-hmm. So the sequels to the original books were written largely to take advantage of the popularity of the 1902 musical. Uh-huh. And the sequels were all broadly based around the popularity of the Scarecrow. So he became a much more important character, and Dorothy was less important in the sequel. I think there are a whole bunch of Oz books.
Yeah.
I have only read the first one. I presume, did you read it as a boy? Have you read it before?
I've never read it. Nope.
The book is interesting. The book doesn't do a lot of the things that make the film most interesting.
Yeah.
The book very quickly sees Dorothy fly up in the sky and end up in Oz, and it doesn't have the film's first sort of 10-minute preamble. Set in the black and white Kansas.
Yeah, it's crucial.
And so then the film doesn't. The book doesn't have the punchline at the end of the movie, which is that all the characters in Oz are actually the real life characters that she was just dreaming about.
Yeah.
So in a way, I think the book is missing this really important dimension that the film brings.
Yeah.
So you watched the whole of the film without the Pink Floyd soundtrack this week?
So I watched I watched the first act twice because I watched it with the Pink Floyd soundtrack, and then just gave up on that and went back and watched the whole film. It's only an hour and 40 minutes, so it's not I mean, you do end up hearing, if you're doing the Pink Floyd, you hear the first side, if you are thinking in vinyl, which I am, you hear the first side 3 times, I think, and the second side twice.
Yeah, well, so I watched a version of Dark Side of the Rainbow on YouTube, which is kind of does something slightly different. So it starts the Dark Side of the Moon on the third roar of the line, which is the way that you're supposed to.
That's what they always say.
And then it just plays the album through once.
Oh.
And comes to an end with Dorothy listening for the Tin Man's heart.
Oh.
And then doesn't continue. It just plays the album once with the film to illustrate it, rather than playing the whole film and playing the album several times.
Okay, interesting. That's not the way I saw it. So we had different experiences there too. Huh.
Do we need to tell the story of the Wizard of Oz?
We probably need to stop this podcast and then we both go back and watch it again and listen to it again. But I mean, I will tell the story. I'm only going to really work on the first act, I think. You're right. This is a 1939 film that everyone on the planet has seen more than once. So, and I'm assuming that because you saw Twisters first, that's why you decided, hey, we've got to obviously watch The Wizard of Oz.
It seemed like the obvious comparator. It seemed more interesting than comparing it to Twister.
It has an interesting setup in the sense that it's directed by Victor Fleming, but King Vidor was influential. He's kind of credited depending on where you're looking. And then George Cukor, another great director of the time, was in there too. So there were a lot of people who had a look at it. And this is really like a either accidentally or intentionally, this is a massive collaboration because you had a number of directors working on it. In terms of screenplay, yes, you're using the Baum books, but Noel Langley is credited, Florence Ryerson, Edgar Allan Wolfe.
Yeah.
And then others like Ogden Nash and even Herman Mankiewicz worked on it. So there are just a lot of hands in the pot here or cooks in the kitchen. It sounds like, the books had been around for 30 years. There was a musical out there too. So there's a lot of source material and a lot of people who knew the material and worked on it. So that might be a good thing in this case. I don't know. Usually if I see a bunch of writers or a bunch of directors, I think something's inherently wrong, but this comes off well. It's a classic.
Yeah, exactly. It works, weirdly.
Yeah. So Judy Garland is, of course, Dorothy. Frank Morgan plays the Wizard and Captain Marvel. Ray Bolger is the Scarecrow. Ultimately, Bert Lahr as the Lion, Jack Haley as the Tin Man, and Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch of the West. It's so appropriate that one of our sponsors now, who create the Witch's Stands, it was the sponsor for this episode. Go figure. Also, the Singer Midgets as the Munchkins. And the Munchkins are interesting because I think there are a lot of children in there too, but there's sort of a core group of true Munchkins, true midgets, true dwarfs. And then there were some kids. So if you look at that film carefully, you'll see some young people as well. But and yeah, does anyone really need to hear me summarizing The Wizard of Oz? Probably not, but I'll do a quick paragraph on it. It opens in black and white on Dorothy and her dog Toto, a Cairn Terrier. I thought it was a West Highland. It's a Cairn, Cairn Terrier. Apparently not a West Highland Terrier. They are nervous together and running around on a dusty Kansas road. It's a farm road under ominous skies. As her family and their farm hands are readying the grounds for this forthcoming storm, no one has time to listen to Dorothy communicate about her plight after Toto has been upsetting the gardens of their neighbor, Mrs. Gulch. That's also Margaret Hamilton, who plays the Wicked Witch later on, who apparently is a nice woman. I have a friend whose doctor is her grandson, and he spoke very highly of her, but that's probably her most famous role. So playing against her personality anyway. There are traits of brains, courage, heart, and cowardice. They're not so subtly foreshadowed among the farmhands, which is good. I think it sets it up. So we definitely know that these characters are going to play a part in the next section that's not in black and white. Feeling neglected, Dorothy breaks into Somewhere Over the Rainbow, implying that there must be a better place for her. Dorothy has a fall. She falls into the pig pen, actually, and has a knock on the head. Miss Gulch confronts the family and takes Toto away to be destroyed. Ooh, dark. But she foolishly fails to secure him, her, or them. I don't want to misgender the dog. Doesn't properly secure the dog inside her basket on her bicycle, and the dog escapes.
That's just asking for trouble, isn't it?
Yes, especially with a Cairn Terrier, my God. Dorothy, who is a brash teenager at heart, decides to run away with Toto, only to be gently directed back home by the traveling soothsayer, Professor Marvel. Dorothy and Toto get caught in the disastrous flirtation of a beautiful studio tornado. Oh, my God. And Dorothy is ultimately knocked unconscious by a very flimsy and poorly mounted window sash and sent into a storm dream hellscape of persistent memory and misadventure. When she awakens, Dorothy opens the door to a Technicolor world at the beginning of Act 2. Dorothy will have a chance to explore that rainbow world of somewhere else and determine if it's better or worse, or if it's someplace like home. That's good. So yeah, as soon as that door opens, classic end of the act, goes from black and white to color. And apparently my neighbors on the Coles, ancient when I was a kid, they were ancient. They bought their first color TV, and the first thing they watched was The Wizard of Oz, and they were so upset because they thought it wasn't working, that it was black and white, so they're hammering on the thing with their fists trying to get color. And then eventually it becomes a color film. So that's The Wizard of Oz. There's lots of other stuff that happens after that, but we can talk a little bit about it. The first thing I would say is just I'm amazed at the studio. I mean, this looks like a big sound stage in that first act, especially. And the camera moves are great. It's one of these things where there are not a lot of cuts. There's a lot of camera rehearsal, you can tell. So that like the Somewhere Over the Rainbow sequence is really lovely, and there's barely a camera. There's barely a cut in there. So it's this days of cinema where they would rehearse moves and block actors, and it's just a beautiful film, and I was really, really impressed with the photography on such a big stage and just engaging camera moves. I really liked that. You can just see how practiced everyone on the crew was.
And I think it's even more impressive they're moving the camera around when you learn how big the Technicolor cameras were.
Yeah,
because they were enormous. Yeah. I think they were shooting 3 different synchronized wheels for each of the 3 colors, weren't they?
Yeah.
So it was like having 3 mechanisms in one, and apparently the Technicolor cameras they were using were about the size of wardrobes.
Yeah, they're big.
So it's not trivial to move these cameras around.
Exactly.
So it's you have to admire the ambition of deciding, yes, we're going to have like a big crane shot here.
Yep.
Because there would have been plenty of people in the studio asking, do we really have to do this? Could we do this a simpler way?
Yeah.
Is this necessary?
And to a certain extent, I feel like we suffer in this day and age because, cameras are basically phones, and people are moving them they're moving them like tornadoes. They're moving all over the place. They're spinning and twirling, and they're here and there, and then people are just cutting film, cutting. Whereas in the old days, you'd see composition, I think, and I don't think you see composition in the same way that we used to. Every director has that one show-off move these days where they move the camera long and steady for like 35 seconds or whatever, but most filming is not nearly as elegant as the old days where you had the clunky machinery and you had to make it work.
If you watch the Pink Floyd version, then that Technicolor moment when Dorothy steps out into the world of Oz is to the beginning of Money, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
And it's a cute musical moment. Lyrically, it doesn't really make any sense.
No,
though. It's just that a few of the things that happen in the film happen to happen at the same time as a few interesting musical cues on the album. But it's hardly a perfect parallel, I must say.
No, but I think the thing that's striking is that such a most of the songs on that record have very, very distinct and different sounds, and Money is no exception. So it's it's really changing the mood, just as the film changes at the same time. So that I remember that one was working pretty well. There's some big moments. The Ding Dong Which Is Dead is this huge, highly choreographed old Hollywood showstopper with the huge colors and a big cast, and it's just something you don't see very often anymore. And I wasn't impressed with all of the songs. I think there are a couple of great songs, but there's some clunkers in there too. But the film just goes right along, and I think it works really well. And it's one of these things where you're allies on the journey. There's definitely hero's journey stuff here too, but picking up the Scarecrow who's looking for something, the Tin Man who needs a heart, the Lion who's everyone's looking for something. Everyone needs something. So there's motivation among everyone on the team. And
the ultimate punchline is that the thing they're all looking for, or the things that they already have anyway.
Yes.
So it's which is it's just a lovely story. Reading the book for the first time, having never read it before, and having seen the film a couple of times, it's interesting to read those bits of the book which they have kept for the film and those things which they have thrown away. There's a foreword at the beginning of the book where Frank L. Baum says that he wanted to write a book for children that leaves out the heartaches and nightmares that are seen in so many children's books.
Yeah.
So he wanted to write a book which was just all nice all the time, and he completely fails because there's lots of nightmarish things that happen in the book, and in the film. The flying monkey's terrifying.
Yeah. Oh God! Thank you for mentioning that. Yes. As a kid, that was scary from the moment I saw it. And they're like these flying gargoyles, and they go off and kidnap Dorothy, and they take the entire brainless, heartless, and cowardly posse with them, and they take them out. It's very scary.
Yeah,
agreed. Yeah.
It really is nightmarish.
Yeah.
And I kind of hadn't really kind of quite realized until reading the book that it borrows an awful lot from the Odyssey, doesn't it, as well? I think this book kind of is, or this story kind of is the Odyssey, really. Yeah. It has this kind of perilous long journey.
Yep.
In the book, there's like a long boat journey. There are lotus eaters. There are fearsome beasts. There's like a number of quite Odyssey-like events that haven't made it all the way to the film.
Yeah.
But yeah, it feels fairly explicitly like the Odyssey when you read it on the page. The other thing that's probably worth saying is that having read the book, it feels very much like a sort of a Marxist socialist parable. I haven't read what other people's opinions are about the book, so I'm going to assume this is so obvious that many other people have drawn the parallels before. But it strikes me as it's very clear it's a parable about a socialist collective defeating capitalism. Because like each of the characters, we've kind of said they all have this thing they desire, and they all have an abundance of this quality that they desire already, right from the start of the story. So the Scarecrow says he wants a brain, but certainly in the book, he has the best brains of the group. Yeah. He comes up with all the best ideas. He's like the intellectuals. He's like a sort of a country-born intellectual, literally born in the fields. He's like a working-class intellectual. Yeah. The Tin Man is like the tireless worker, the working proletariat. The lion who says he is cowardly but actually is brave. Mm-hmm. I think of his as like he's like an iconoclast. He has the bravery to challenge ideas and to progress. And then Dorothy is like she's a lone woman trying to get on in the world on her own terms. She basically is the woman's movement.
Yeah.
So it's the four of them. It's the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Lion, and Dorothy. It's the intellectuals, the proletariat, the iconoclasts, and the women's movement. They're the four pillars of progressive socialism. And between them, they defeat the three enemies of the people. So they defeat the Wicked Witch of the West, she's like a robber baron, basically. She's enslaved her workers. She's forced the flying monkeys into slavery. They defeat the Wicked Witch of the East. This is my favourite bit. She's literally killed by a property crash, isn't she? It couldn't be more explicit. She's like the landowners. All of her worth is invested in property. When the house comes crashing down out of the sky, that's the end of her. And in the end, they sort of outwit Oz, like the pretend wizard, who I feel is like the story's equivalent of Elon Musk. Or Sam Altman or something like that. Yeah. He's like the kind of the technocrat.
Yeah.
They pull back the curtain, and Oz or Elon or Sam or whoever it is shrugs and says, you got me. Okay, I was just hiding behind all this technology. Now you can see me for the swindler I am. And then he promptly flees by balloon to some sort of safe sanctuary, a bit like Jeff Bezos getting in a private jet and running to his exclusive compound in New Zealand. So it feels to me like this is very explicitly a parable about a socialist collective defeating the evils of capitalism. There is a problem though, which is in the book, in the final third of the book, that there's a whole third of the book after where the point that the film ends.
Yeah.
And that bit of the book completely subverts any of these socialist themes, because then each of the characters becomes a king in their own land.
Oh.
So it remains fabulously socialist until that point, and then it just becomes capitalist again. But otherwise, that really amused me. I thought, oh my goodness, yes, this is a proper little bit of sort of Marxist. This is Marxist for preschoolers.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Dr. Ruzicka, for sure. I think the context is important to know. If the books were written in 1900. And then the film's 1939, so you're talking 10 years after the Great Depression. and the start of the stock market crash. I mean, if you see it in that context, it makes great sense, because this is the period where labor unions were really happening, and there was definitely an anti-capitalist feeling against the robber barons who were making so much money in the late 1800s. So I think seen in the context of the time that it was conceived as a book, a series, and then a musical, and then finally a film, absolutely. And, you know, we sort of just in Twisters, we talked about, you know, that one subplot that wasn't anti-capitalist enough or wasn't damning enough, I think, against the bad guys. And then this film just does it. That's a perfect way of doing it. You know, it's a children's story. It's a very universal story, but it sneaks a great idea in there. So well done. For sure, yeah. The one thing I would add, though, is that the wizard has created the Emerald City, and the Emerald City does seem like this real utopia, and the travelers are very well treated when they get there, and everyone seems freaking happy, and they're all in these fantastic green garments and such. Everything's emerald, emerald, emerald. So it's a little odd that the wizard has this sort of monarchical identity, even though he's created this sort of what looks like a sort of a socialist utopia sort of scene, but. I think everything you said is in there for sure. Makes the film that much better for me. There's some other things that aren't so good, though. I think there's a bit too much Deus ex machina in this film.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, especially with the she's the nice witch of the north, I guess. You know, you get the evil witch of the east is dead due to the housing market crash, as you said. The Wicked Witch of the West, boy, they are very excited. Her minions are so happy when Dorothy kills her.
Yeah.
But there are these things where, like, the Witch of the North, the nice witch, who's named Gilda or something like that.
Glinda, I think it is. Yeah.
So she has another name. She's not really a witch, I guess. She says she's a good witch, but she sort of appears at the end and says, you know, what have you learned? Everything you need is right in front of you. So it's like it's kind of a letdown to know that all Dorothy had to do was click her heels 3 times and say there's no place like home, because she probably accidentally clicked her heels 3 times at some point and should have ended up in Kansas. So I didn't like that there's every once in a while there's just this really simple solution that is based on, you know, some sort of higher power or whatnot. And also there's the incompetence that has to go along with that sometimes, which is like the Wicked Witch of the West has Dorothy in her clutches, but for some reason she decides to take this sand, what is that, an hourglass, yeah?
Right.
And
yep.
It's just, we talked about the use of a ticking clock in the first film. I mean, she turns over this hourglass as if, okay, I'm going to give you this much time for some really unclear reason. You've got this much life left, but that's going to be enough time for Toto to escape, because that's what Toto does. And then, you know, he's going to go round up the posse of the Lion, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man. And they do a great thing. They impersonate the guards. The Lion is scary for once. The Tin Man uses his axe really well to bust this chain and like raise the door to the moat, the castle or something. The Scarecrow catches fire. And then, of course, when Dorothy tries to put out him on fire, she actually hits the witch with the water. And it's like, well, who would have thunk that water's going to kill the witch? Does that mean she can never hydrate properly because it will kill her? And suddenly the tyrant is dead. So, I mean, there are a lot of these really facile sort of solutions in the scripts, and maybe that's too many hands in the kitchen, in the pot, in the soup. And then, yeah, again, at one point, Oz is just going to, suddenly I'll take you in my balloon back in time and place to your home. And it's like she misses her Uber because, again, Toto escapes, because that's what Toto does. Everyone should realize Toto's going to do this again and again. He's going to mess things up, or she, or they, or whatnot. So it's, there are a lot of moments like that, which I think are kind of letdowns, but ultimately, there's the great reverse house crash because she lands back in bed in black and white in Kansas, and the Technicolor dream is over, and, you know, we end up with this theme of, again, yep, there's no place like home. It's not necessarily a good place, but there's no place like it, even if it doesn't like you. That's what I learned. So,
like the ultimate message of the film is be satisfied with your lot.
Yes, essentially, right? Like, you've got everything you need. And I mean, that's For a lot of people, that's not enough in this day and age when you can have so many things so cheaply and so easily. But the truth be told, I think that is a great message that you've got what you need. You just need to repurpose it somehow. You need to dream differently or think differently. And I think that's a beautiful message and perfectly in line with everything you said earlier. But I did learn, like, if you get a Cairn Terrier, double leash that dog and just have leashes everywhere. You don't let the dog off a leash. Just keep it in a cage or a leash at all times.
I will say one other thing about the dark side of the rainbow.
Oh yeah, good.
Insofar, so I mean, there are these kind of cute parallels. I kind of, like you, didn't find it super impressive. But I was, listening to it at home with my headphones on, and maybe if I'd been in a big theatre with a big sort of quadraphonic sound system.
But did you have the QC45s? Were you using the Bose QC45s? Product placement.
Well, the noise cancelling headphones for dogs, you mean?
Yes, Toto loves them.
But I did look it up a little bit. So the phenomenon basically it's called apophenia.
Oh, okay.
This is like the human inclination to spot patterns.
Yeah.
So it's the same part of your brain that makes faces out of the fronts of motor cars.
Yeah.
So it's normal to spot patterns where there probably are no patterns, because a large part of how humans interpret the world is through pattern recognition. We're pattern recognizing machines.
Yeah.
That's what we're good at. And so we will spot patterns even if they're not there. I think it's a particularly enjoyable experience when you watch Dark Side of the Rainbow, because it is a great, great film.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful film. And Dark Side of the Moon is a great, great album.
Yeah.
So you're putting these two terrific bits of art together. So there's always going to be something interesting to appeal, to tickle the brain. So I did a little bit look up about this on the internet. So I was having a search. Well, are there any other similar phenomena? Ooh. So my standard search these days, I go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, well, are there any other similar album and film parallels?
Yeah.
And surprise, surprise, ChatGPT really didn't understand what I was talking about. But it kind of suggested basically some fairly random looking examples. It suggested Metropolis and a Daft Punk album, Discovery, because it was saying, similar themes, because they both contain robots. And it also suggested Night of the Living Dead versus The Suburbs by Arcade Fire, which I think was a big film school album when we were there, I think.
Yeah, it definitely was, yeah.
And having a search on the internet, I can't find anywhere where people suggest, you should listen to Discovery by Daft Punk as you watch Metropolis. So I think this is something which ChatGPT has made up.
Yeah.
But I tried it.
Oh.
So I sat down and I watched Metropolis and put Discovery on by Daft Punk. And you know what? They go together perfectly.
Oh.
There's this like opening sequence of machinery in Metropolis, which is timed perfectly with the beat of the opening song on Discovery. And then the opening lyric is "One More Time," which comes on just as the big clock at the beginning of Metropolis appears on the screen.
Yeah. Oh.
The lyric "Don't Stop the Dancing" is timed with all the workers swaying out of the elevator and all moving in time together.
Oh, yeah.
And it just fits together perfectly. So I thought, well, I'm onto something here.
Yes.
So I did watch Night of the Living Dead while playing The Suburbs by Arcade Fire. And you know what? It works perfectly. So it opens with this lyric, in the suburbs I learned to drive, so grab your mother's keys, we're leaving. And just as the characters drive by in a car, and the camera follows this car as it goes across the screen, and then they get to a cemetery, and the lyrics are "Move your feet from hot pavement and into the grass," just as the characters, they walk off the road and they head into the grassy cemetery. I mean, it's just perfect.
Huh.
It's perfect. And it's not intentional, and it is utter coincidence. But basically, this is my brain happily smiling at little coincidences and finding patterns where they don't exist. I reckon you can probably put any album on with any film, and chuckle away at the remarkable coincidences. So it's a feature of the human brain. Is it a feature or a bug? I'm not sure.
So career advice for you upcoming bands out there: get your favorite film, watch it as a group. with the sound off and then just jam, create a soundtrack to it, and then get it out to the ChatGPT so that it can be recommended.
Yes. Maybe if you made a soundtrack to Twisters with the sound down, you might improve the quality of that film.
I don't question that at all. I think you're spot on.
Well, in a minute, let's see whether we can draw a few parallels between The Wizard of Oz and Twisters. But before we do, should we quickly play my favourite game?
I'm going first.
Okay, let's play Who Am I?
Who am I?
I want to go first.
You go first. I always force my way to the front of the queue. I'm going to let you go first.
I'm going first because I know that you are Ben, the bumbling British journalist, but I am also Ben because I'm not really suited to that kind of adventure. This isn't the Twisters film. I'm trying to extract something literate and worthwhile from a dull existence in a dumbed-down world. I'm uncomfortable and awkward, weak-stomached, clueless, but able to find the real story in all the madness and not type or write a single thing, but still be called a writer. These writers never actually do any writing in the movies, which I find I wish I had that skill.
Yeah, it'd be great to submit articles without actually having to write anything, yeah.
You just think it onto the screen or into the paper. It's brilliant.
Well, we need to get you a flat between Streatham Hill and West Norwood then, don't we? That's where the top journalists live, yes. I wish I was Ben, I suppose. I'm not as tall and I don't have such good teeth. I came away from the films this week thinking that there is a bit of the Scarecrow, and a bit of the Tin Man, and a bit of the Lion in all of us. I think that is a big part of the enduring appeal of The Wizard of Oz. Yeah. I think all of us, I certainly commonly feel that I wish I had a brain, and I wish I had a heart, and I wish I had a bit more courage.
Yeah.
So I feel like I am all of Dorothy's friends in The Wizard of Oz. And I think that's sort of how the film works, isn't it? I think that's sort of what it's for.
You're the allies.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that's kind of the film working as intended. But I came away. They're good characters. Are enjoyable, and I feel for their deficits. Although I haven't persuaded myself that I have the characteristics that they feel they lack.
Yeah.
Even though they have really. All right. Well, let's we'll play the jingle.
Yeah, play the jingle.
We'll try and blow these two films together somehow. We'll spin them together until they mix.
Like a twister. I feel a little guilty because I kind of broke in on the music for that was probably. Who am I?
Could have heard the music before.
I was over eager to beat you to Ben.
So I've written in my notes. I've written here 2 films about wind. I've also written 2 films with female leads. Who kind of gather a team around themselves. There are 2 films about trying to get home to Kansas. Really?
Yes. Yep. No place like home.
Yeah, and they are also 2 films with basically no romantic subplot of any kind.
It's a little creepy. I think there is a little Scarecrow Dorothy thing happening there. Doesn't she? She sort of lingers on him when she's saying goodbye, and then I think when she's in bed at the end, doesn't she put her hand on him or something like that? It was little, but yeah, definitely not a true romantic interest. Let's put it that way. I think I agree. I agree.
I think Dorothy's first love is Toto, surely.
Yes. For all the science, there's very little chemistry in the Twisters film.
I did kind of come away that for all the parallels, that they have very opposite political stances, though. So the Wizard of Oz to me seems progressive.
Yeah.
So it's about the triumph of intelligence and compassion and bravery, and it's about women's empowerment. I think largely a lot of powerful women in that film. Yep. It's about how it's possible to move forward through collective efforts. It's a film about smashing the oppressors, freeing the working class. I can get behind all of the.
My fists are in the air as you speak.
Whereas Twisters, on the other hand, like we said before, it just feels so reactionary to me. It's kind of Twisters kind of folds its arms and it says, "Well, city bad, country good."
Yeah.
And kind of Twisters has this kind of attitude that education is bad. That hands-on experience, that's what real learning is. And you city types who've just gone to university, don't really know anything. And and also I suppose Twisters, by ignoring climate change, it basically instructs you: do not seek to change what is causing you ill, just react to it.
Yeah.
In Twisters, inflation is the real problem. Climate change is not something that you should talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So. They're how many years apart are they? Are they 85 years apart?
85 years apart, yeah.
85 years apart, and we have moved from from comfortable middle left to comfortable middle right in those years.
Yeah, I wrote down the same thing. Hero's Journey for Women.
Yeah.
No Place Like Home.
Yep.
Allies. Both of these films are about allies. And putting back together a crew of allies when you've lost them in Twisters.
Yeah.
But I felt like the kinship is much stronger in The Wizard of Oz than it is in Twisters. And in part because of the quasi-romantic story there. I think, you've got your classic meet cute. They hate each other. They kind of fall for each other. They're supposed to hate each other again, and then they fall for each other at the end, right? And I think that gets in the way of the buildup of a true core group of allies. So I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
For me, there's a big difference between the films in terms of protagonists. Like I think in The Wizard of Oz, you've got ghosts in the machine, as I mentioned earlier, and they kind of fix things, and when they need fixing, there's this result that's positive for the protagonist. And it's this danger of inactive protagonists. I actually think they do accomplish stuff, but there's a lot of help along the way. Whereas I think that I don't think inactive protagonists are always a bad thing. And as writers, we're told, they've got to be, facing their problems and taking action to solve them. I think the protagonists are kind of too active in Twisters. Whenever you're driving into the center of a tornado and then drilling down into the earth using these sort of stabilizers that are attached hydraulically to your truck, and then shooting fireworks into the core of the tornado, I think that's a little too active for a protagonist. Which is very funny because there's no real mention of fixing what the real cause of the tornadoes is, but you can always go in with a big truck and fix them for yourself. So there's almost too much action for the protagonists in Twisters. Is that more human empowerment is my question in Twisters, and a little less human empowerment in The Wizard of Oz, which is sort of this fantasy film with magical characters? I don't know. I definitely preferred Oz to Twisters. And as I said, I don't mind the fact that they're kind of inactive, because what they are is they're a very realistic group of people thrown together and trying to solve problems. And they make mistakes, they step in the mud, and they get through it, basically. So I prefer Oz for that reason, but I think there's definitely a lot of ally stuff in both of these stories. And I think, particularly in Wizard of Oz, but even in Twisters, there's this acceptance of others on the journey and helping each other on the journey. And they're different people. You've got the Munchkins in the Wizard of Oz. You've got all the Emerald City people. You've got the very different characters with their very real strengths and real shortcomings in the Wizard of Oz. And there are some very different characters in Twisters too. I think it's stronger. The message of acceptance of the various people is much stronger in the Wizard of Oz. But there's some of it in Twisters for sure.
Right. Yeah. So I can believe that the people who made Twisters watched The Wizard of Oz at least.
Absolutely. Oh my God, yes.
Maybe they didn't pay attention to all the fine details, though.
Yeah, there's very early mention of in Twisters of muscles and brains, similar to the beginning of Oz. As you said, the one of the machines that Javi has in Twisters is named Dorothy, and then his later gear is called Tin Man, Strongman, and Lion, I think. So it's all there. Was it Lion? Was Lion the third scanner?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, Lion was their truck, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So they definitely stole from it, but I think they could have stolen the better stuff. You got to steal the better stuff, right?
Damn it, they stole the wrong bits.
Well, they just stole names. There's nothing in a name, really.
Okay. So they stole the wrong bits. I think that should be the title of the podcast. We have just got time to talk about also what has also been playing at this theatre.
You go first.
Okay, I am going to go first this time. We had a nice holiday away in a little cottage in the country which had no internet the other week. So I had to order some DVDs to take. It was amazing. They had a DVD player but no internet. So we got there, and on the first night after we'd unpacked all our stuff, put the DVD on, we watched 12 Angry Men from 1957. And my God, good. It's a very long time since I last watched that film, and that is just a masterpiece.
So good, yeah.
I really think it is a masterpiece. In 1957, Sidney Lumet, Henry Fonda. Yeah. I had forgotten what a beautiful film it is.
Yeah, it's really, yeah.
I mean, it is kind of, it is like a filmed play.
Yep.
But the black and white photography can be just fantastic. There's a short scene towards the end of the film where there is a show of hands.
Yeah.
And each character puts up their hand, and so you get 12 different shots of a man's hand raised in the air, and each one of them is like it's like a Karsh portrait or something like that. Beautiful, perfectly lit black and white photograph of a hand, and they are all different and they are all beautiful. It's just fabulously well shot. It's a masterpiece. It's fantastic, really terrific.
Correct me if I'm not remembering something correctly, but I think you can even see sort of the facial hair grow on these guys. Like the makeup department is good too, because they've been sequestered in this room, right? And they get stubble over the course of the film. It's just
they certainly get sweaty. Yes.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So, great film.
Yeah, it is.
Good choice. Did the kids watch it too?
They did. I think Edward liked it. Alice is a little bit annoyed because she finds the way that people talk in black and white films a bit too stagey.
Yeah.
And fair enough. That is like that's a kind of a culture clash hump that you have to climb over, I suppose.
Yeah,
but yeah,
Fonda so good though.
It inspired a bit of conversation among the family. So it's
and actually I think a very good critique of the judicial system in this country.
Yes. I mean, it's amazing how this film made in 1957 still could largely have been made today. There's very, very little about it that feels dated. It feels very, very contemporary still.
Yeah. And what's that? The last scene where they just wants to know, what's your name? Who are you? Right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Beautiful. Okay. Beat that.
Oh, I didn't see any movies. I watched a number of episodes. I finished season, I think it's 11 of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is a big show here with Larry David, who's done many seasons over the course of, I think, 20-something years, maybe. He's done 11 seasons. I might have the number wrong, but so we watched the final season of that. And then I watched, I've been watching a lot of public television. Jeez.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm a donor. We have to give money for public television here. So I've been watching a lot of documentaries on the ocean, and specifically here the Gulf of Maine, which is one of the fastest warming bodies of water on the planet. And then I watched the Lance Armstrong documentary. It's on Netflix. I think it was done originally for ESPN. It's called 30 by 30. So it's supposed to be 30 minutes. They sort of suckered me into 3 hours. Because this guy's so complicated and interesting that they ended up doing 2 1.5 hour pieces on him. I don't know if you remember Lance Armstrong, who was a cyclist. Yeah, won 7 consecutive Tour de France's, and of course was later found to be doping, as all cyclists were in that era. Interesting documentary. I've been working on this thing for decades now. Which is sort of about a cycle racer on drugs. So it was homework for me as well, but I thought it was really good. Not because he's a likable guy necessarily, but because he's a very human guy, and he's one of those guys you don't like. He's kind of detestable in some ways, but you can still relate to him. I think it's interesting. So I had some good experiences, but I did not see another movie. I started RMN last night. Have you heard of that?
That's like the beginning of the name of a film. Is that how does that work?
That's the entire. I don't know why it's called RMN. It's a Romanian film. Maybe that's what it is. Romania.
Is it a prequel to RRR?
Oh boy! Yes, it does. Alphabetically, it would be a prequel because it comes before RRR. But it's a different country. It's actually, as I said, a Romanian film. The same director who did 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, or something like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Some years ago, I don't remember the director's name offhand and couldn't pronounce his name probably. But interesting. So we started that on Hulu last night. We'll finish it up tonight, and I'm going to recommend it, even though I haven't seen the end of it. And in part because it's pacey. It's oddly pacey. It's one of these films that, there's not a lot of big action moments, but it moves quickly through story. So it's a very interesting balance of like a thoughtful, what you would in the hands of many directors and story writers would be like kind of this slogging kind of over detailed thing. And it's pacey. It's surprisingly pacey. So RMN.
It's nice to have a bit of pace.
Yeah. Pace.
So pacey they couldn't even put any vowels in the name. They were in too much of a hurry.
Moved so quickly they couldn't give it like a long name.
On Instagram, we are at Two Real Cinema Club. Read the blog at tworealcinemaclub.com. Comment on our YouTube channel or email us. We love your emails. We are tworealcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time...
Ooh. Yes, we just decided, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've already forgotten. Oh, we're going into space.
We are going into space.
Alien Romulus is coming out on Friday.
Yes.
We're going to see that. And
premiere on Thursday, release on Friday. We're going to go and see that.
So these films are what?
And we're going to compare it to...
35 years apart? Is that right? The original Alien is, you said 1970...
1979, yes.
Okay. Wow. Talk about intellectual property that just keeps living into the space age. Here we go. I'm looking forward to it because it's been a long time since I saw the first one. There's that scene, there's the dinner scene. I think you guys know what I'm talking about.
I haven't seen that first one for a long time. I am looking forward to revisiting it. I remember it, being good. I hope my memory is accurate.
I want to say is it John Hurt?
It is John Hurt. Yeah.
Poor John Hurt. Good man. It's a good man.
So don't eat before seeing the film. Join us next time. We're going to go to the popcorn counter next week and talk about something. And then we'll be in space the week after that. So join us for that. Looking forward to it. Until then, see you next time.
Bye, everyone.